How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another video. Today we're making a braided lemon loaf. It's filled with a lemon curd and a cream cheese filling. The curd providing the sharpness and a burst of flavor, and a cream cheese to balance it all out. All wrapped in a beautifully rich dough that is super soft and fluffy. And it's so easy to make. And the best part is that it's super customizable. You could fill it with whatever you like. So let's get to it and see what we need. There are quite a few elements to this dish, but most of them use the same ingredients. So for the dough, we'll need some strong white bread flour, milk, some sour cream, an egg, some soft butter, yeast, sugar, salt, and some vanilla syrup. Then for the cream cheese part of the filling, we'll need some full-fat cream cheese, some sour cream, sugar, a little bit of flour, and lemon juice. For the lemon curd part of the filling, we'll need some freshly squeezed lemon juice, sugar, a couple of eggs, cold cubed butter, and the zest from those lemons. And last but not least, for decorating the loaf, I got some sugar pearls and an egg yolk mixed with 1 teaspoon of milk for glazing. As you can see, most of the elements share the same ingredients. We got our dough here on the left, in the middle, got the cream cheese part of the filling, then on the right, we got our lemon curd and the decorations. And all of this will be transformed in a beautiful loaf. Now let's see what equipment we need. We'll need a tray with some non-stick paper, a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, temperature probe, a brush, a rolling pin, and a fine grater for the lemon zest. We'll need a small pan for cooking the lemon curd in, need a whisk, and a spatula would come in handy as well. So with that out of the way, let's start working. This is the easiest part of the whole project, the cream cheese filling. Simply combine the sugar, the lemon juice, the flour, and the sour cream, and give it all a good mix until it's nice and smooth. And it must be done in this order. If you add the cream cheese now, you'll end up with a lumpy mix. So first mix all the other ingredients until they're nice and smooth, and only then add the cream cheese. It's important to note that I'm using full fat cream cheese. It'll keep its shape better, it will not leak in the oven as it's baking. And if sour cream is not available where you live, then you can replace the sour cream in the dough as well as in the filling with some plain yogurt. Also full fat, of course. So once you finish mixing that, cover it up and leave it in the fridge for later. Now let's get on with the lemon curd. Making lemon curd, or any curd for that matter, is super simple. Grab a small pot, combine the lemon juice, the lemon zest, the sugar, and the eggs. Now grab a whisk and whisk it all together until it's nice and smooth. The only ingredient that we are not adding at this point is the butter, and we'll whisk the butter into the curd once it's cooked. So keep it on the side ready to go. So let's head over to the stove and cook this thing. You want to cook it on medium heat for around 5 to 6 minutes, whisking occasionally. You want to bring the curd up to a temperature between 75 and 80 degrees Celsius. And as soon as it hits that temperature, take it off the heat. And once you learn to make lemon curd, you can make any curd, as you can replace the lemon juice with any other juice, or any combination of juices. Now this is looking good to me. I'm going to take it off the heat and finish with the butter. Adding the butter now instead of the beginning reduces the risk of splitting the curd. And you want to emulsify it in gradually, so we're going to do it in 2 batches. Add half the butter, whisk until it's completely dissolved, and only when the first batch of butter disappears, add the rest. If you want your curd to be completely smooth, you can pass it through a sieve now. I don't mind the lemon zest, so I kept it in. Now grab a small bowl, pour your curd into it, and cover it with cling film so that the cling film is touching the surface. We want to avoid it forming a skin on top. And this needs to go into the fridge to cool down completely. It'll take at least 3 hours. I actually left mine overnight. But once your curd is ready, you can move on to the next step, making the pre-ferment. This is a quick pre-ferment, so we need it to ferment quickly, so we use warm milk in this case. And I'll show you later on how to balance out the warmth of the pre-ferment to get the dough temperature right. But the pre-ferment itself is a very simple thing to make. Add a portion of the milk, add all the yeast and a portion of the total flour. And we'll leave it to proof for 45 minutes to an hour. The main reason for using pre-ferment in this dough is to make it even softer and fluffier. But if you don't want to mess around with making a pre-ferment, then simply take the pre-ferment ingredients and add them to the final dough and mix everything from the get-go. Yes, you will sacrifice a bit of texture, but you will gain convenience. There's always trade-offs, isn't there? But if you do use a pre-ferment, leave it to rise till it's nicely puffed up and full of little bubbles. And this is looking pretty good, as you can see. But the problem we're facing now is that the pre-ferment is at room temperature, and kneading a dough by hand especially will warm it up quite a lot. So I'm not only using cold egg, cold milk and cold sour cream for the main dough, I've also chilled down my flour. All of this will help us balance out the temperature of the pre-ferment. And when kneading a dough by hand, it's always better to use cooler ingredients. Because if your dough is not at the right temperature when you finish mixing it, then you can simply mix it for longer. But if your dough ends up too warm after mixing it, then there's not much you can do. So making the main dough is super simple. Just grab a large bowl, add the milk, the egg, the butter, the sugar, the salt, the pre-ferment. Follow that with the vanilla paste, the sour cream or yogurt if you're using yogurt. We're basically adding all the ingredients except the flour. And once you've added all your ingredients, you want to mix them well. You want to dissolve any large salt and sugar crystals before you add the flour. Trust me, it's better to do it now than whilst you're kneading the dough later on. So once you've given it all a good mix, add the final ingredient, the rest of the flour, grab your scraper, mix it to a dough. I always like to start off with the scraper, but if the scraper can't handle it, continue on by hand. And once you have a nice cohesive piece of dough, tip it out on the table, we can start kneading it. Now this dough is not too sticky at all, so I'm going to use my regular kneading method here. What I like to do is press down and forwards with the heel of my right hand, then using the fingers of my left hand I fold the piece of dough under the heel of my right hand, then turn it and repeat. And once you've done this a few times, the motion will become fluent. It'll be like second nature. And this dough doesn't take long at all. After around 6 minutes of kneading, it's nice and smooth and we're ready to ferment it. Now pop it in a bowl and take its temperature. Around 25 degrees Celsius is just about right for this. If your dough is warmer, it'll ferment more rapidly. If it's cooler, it'll take longer. I'm going to cover it up and leave it for 45 minutes. And after the first proof, give it a fold. Folding helps with strengthening the dough and degassing, and also equalizing temperature. And performing fold is super simple. Take your dough out of the bowl, place it smooth side down, flatten it out, then fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until reach the point where it started. Once you have a nice tight bowl, flip it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, then you can pick it up and pinch the seam together at the bottom. That's your fold done. And that's also one way how to shape a round loaf. Now back in the bowl it goes, cover it up, and we'll leave it for another 45 minutes. And now it should start puffing up nicely. So it's been an hour and a half in total, it's nice and puffy. Now we can do the final shaping. So grab your rolling pin, a bit of flour, and I'm going to use my parchment paper to measure my dough against. And of course I've written down the measurements in the recipe. Whenever I have to roll a dough out, I always like to start by hand. So dust it with flour nicely on both sides and start pressing it out with your fingers. Of course don't use your fingertips, use the flat parts of your fingers. Simply press it going back and forth until it's nice and flat, and only then continue on with the rolling pin. I find that when I do it this way, I get a more even result. Now I want this dough to be the same length as my paper, but I do want it to be wider than the paper. So keep rolling and once in a while just measure it against your paper. And this is about the size that I want. As you can see, it's about the same length as the paper, but it's a bit wider than it. Now make sure everything's nice and straight. And what we need to do now is visually divide it into 3 equal strips. And it's best to draw some lines using the scraper, just to guide us along. And then using those lines as a guide, cut the sides into strips. You can do them wider or narrower, that's up to you, as long as you get the same number of strips on both sides. We need to cut 1 strip off of each corner. This will make the loaf look neater when it's finished. Most of the recipes that I've seen so far, they just discard the strips. I don't see a reason for that, so we are going to add them back into the loaf. Simply place them in the middle, it doesn't really matter how and where, as all we're doing is minimizing waste. And now we can start filling this up. And the first thing will be the cream cheese filling, as it makes up most of the filling. Now don't rush this, take your time, be nice and careful. So we must use all of it, So what I like to do is to get it nice and even, start off by filling up the sides, then filling in the top and the bottom, but we must leave a trench in the middle for the lemon curd. The lemon curd recipe is more than what we need for this loaf. So if you want to make the whole recipe, only use half the curd. The rest can be used for other delicious things. Or you can simply halve the amount of ingredients and use all of it. But this is how your filling should look. Cream cheese around and curd in the middle. So remember, all this stuff is super soft, so be gentle here. Fold the top flap down and then start crossing the side strips, alternating from one side to the other and wrapping them around the filling. Now once you reach the bottom, only have a couple of strips left, fold the bottom flap up and cover it with those strips. As you can see, I only had 2 strips left, but I would suggest leaving 4, then folding up the bottom flap and covering it in 4 strips. This will keep the bottom more secure. Another thing to note here is that you could roll the dough out, then place it on a paper, then start cutting it and filling it. Because moving the loaf around is not the easiest thing to do. It's better to have it on the paper straight from the get-go. But we managed anyway. It wasn't the end of the world. Now we want this to rise properly, it really needs to puff up before baking. And the fact that we're using cold lemon curd from the fridge and cold cream cheese will slow down fermentation. And this will take around 2 to 2.5 hours. And during the final hour of fermentation, make sure your oven is preheated, 160 degrees Celsius with a fan on. And you should only take the next step once your bread is nicely puffed up. If it needs longer, leave it for longer. But this one looks about right for me. I'm going to brush it with my egg glaze, and we're actually going to do double glaze to give it an even better crust. So brush it, leave it to dry for 5 minutes, then brush it again. And last but not least, we'll decorate it with some sugar pearls. Actually, normally confectioner's sugar is used for this, but I couldn't find any in the shop. And the sugar pearls worked out quite alright. But whatever you're using, make sure they won't melt in the oven. As a final thing, what I like to do is just to press them in lightly with my hand. And this will really make them stick. Now let's pop this bad boy in the oven. It'll take around 40 to 45 minutes. You can turn it around halfway through the bake to get a nice even crust. You gotta admit, this looks pretty good, right? Now there's a little final addition I decided to do, to brush it with some hot sugar syrup. And all this is equal parts of sugar and water mixed together and brought up to a simmer. This will make the loaf shine, it will keep it moist. So brush it all over as soon as it comes out of the oven. And now leave it to cool down for at least half an hour before you tuck into it. Well, that's how you make a braided lemon loaf. So what do you think of this recipe? Is this something you would try? Let me know down in comments. I really enjoyed this bread. It tasted amazing and the texture was perfect. And this style of loaf is so customizable, you could fill it with any number of different fillings. But as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, drop them down in comments. Subscribe if you haven't already, click that bell, all that good stuff. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.